The last in our series is Napoleon, Life in Exile. Napoleon has been sent to Elba. However, he hasn't really committed any crimes. After all, he argued he was waging war to retain the natural frontiers. So, instead of putting him on trial, they exile him. Elba's off the coast of Italy, close to Europe. He is named king and promised a nice check of 4 million francs each month from France. He had to leave about 160 million in his bank accounts without access to them. But 4 million francs would ensure that he had a decent life and could take care of the citizens of Elba. His wife and son are sent to Austria to grow up as family members of his enemy. And Louis XVIII of the Bourbons is restored and crowned as king. 2 generations after the Louis Bourbon era ended with the French Revolution. France has restored the monarchy and now gone complete full circle against the important French Revolution. At one point, Napoleon is so depressed on the island that he drinks poison that he had always kept in a necklace in case he had been captured. The poison had gone bad, however, and only made him incredibly sick. Elba is a small 12,000 person island that's about the population of Chesterton, with workers employed in the lead or granite works, as well as the iron mines. He takes up residence in a house built by the famous Italian art lovers, the Medicis, for the governor's gardener. He takes the job of Governor King seriously. He calls meetings, he plans new roads, a hospital, and even a military academy. He even starts to build a theater, thinking that there is a long-term solution to this. However, they run out of money, and the salary that Napoleon is supposed to get from the Bourbons never comes. He gets so bored that he liked to play practical jokes. He once slipped a fish into his friend's pocket and then asked for a handkerchief so that the fish came slopping out onto the table. While you can imagine the joy on the emperor's face, remember that just a few months ago he controlled all of Europe, and now he was resorting to sticking fish in his friend's pockets. In the winter, he boards a boat with 650 of his imperial guard, a squad that was there to protect him and that he was paying with that allowance that he was given from the French, as well as Polish cavalry and some volunteers from Elba that he had quickly trained in the military arts. King Louis sends soldiers to stop him, but Napoleon turned out to be prophetic when he said that, quote, "I will arrive in Paris without firing a shot." See, nothing had gone well in France since the Bourbons had taken back over. Each day he added soldiers on his 20-day march to Paris, occasionally confronting the enemies sent to kill him by exposing his bare chest and saying, "Go ahead, shoot your emperor." Each day on a 20-day march to Paris he added soldiers, and the day before he arrived in Paris, Louis abdicates the throne and flees. However, he made a huge mistake. He left Elba at a point where the Allied leaders were all together in Vienna at a conference. 7 days after he started his 20-day march to Paris, the Austrian leader was woken at 7 a.m. with the news that Napoleon had arrived. By 8 a.m., he was already meeting with Russia's Tsar Alexander I. A half hour later, at 8:30, they brought in the German Kaiser, and at 10 they informed the British. In this way, war was declared within an hour of knowing that Napoleon had returned. Napoleon attempted to offer peace, particularly to buy him time, arguing that he had changed based upon his time in Elba, but the Allies outlaw him as a criminal against humanity. Napoleon believed he could get 800,000 troops ready in 1 year, but he only had a month. He felt confident, though, because he had 200,000 men behind him already, and the last time he was winning victories with only 90,000 outside of Paris during the 6-day campaign. As Napoleon normally does, he decides to attack rather than defend. This was a calculated decision. He felt the French would not let him survive long in a siege. He rushes into Belgium to pick the battleground, and the final battle is a 3-day battle in Waterloo, Belgium. Napoleon wins the first day. He separates the Ally armies, dividing them. He gave himself a 90% chance of winning at this point. However, it starts to go bad when he sends a French general named Grouchy with 33,000 troops to prevent the British from linking up with the Prussian army. He doesn't understand the order, however, and Grouchy goes too far. When they hear the guns of the battle, his officers urged him to turn around and march towards the sound. However, he refused, citing his vague orders. Napoleon wins the first day and should have pressed at the beginning of day 2, but he was sick and tired, and he waits until noon inexplicably. At the end of the day, he is winning and believes that if they only had 2 more hours of light, they would have finished them. However, he would have had those hours of light if he had not started at noon. On the 3rd day, the British army finds the Prussian army and successfully avoided Grouchy, who was in the middle of nowhere. The shock of 30,000 British coming out of nowhere was terrifying, so Napoleon lied to his men and told them that it was actually Grouchy's reinforcements and that they were winning. Those French men believed the lie, even as those British began firing on them, believing that they had flipped and were betraying them for British money. Losing the battle, Napoleon retreats and returns to Paris, where the French demand that he abdicates or gives up the throne. His plan is to head to America, but he can't get a visa in time from the French government, and the British blockade his port and take him to England instead. He had been loosed on Europe for exactly 100 days. Facing the British government, Napoleon makes a legal argument that it's a violation of international law to hold him, and the British are puzzled. They can't figure out if he's an illegal alien because France took away his citizenship, and to be an illegal alien you have to be from somewhere, and Napoleon was now from nowhere. They then attempted to argue that he must be a pirate, because then they'd be able to hang him. However, they weren't able to make the argument successful. He also sucked up to the Prince of England, writing the following letter. Your Highness, exposed to the factions which distract my country and to the enmity of the greatest power of Europe, I have ended my political career, and I come, like Themistocles, to throw myself on the hospitality of the English people. I put myself under the protection of their laws, which I claim from your Royal Highness as the most powerful, the most constant, and the most generous of my enemies. The British finally agreed to exile him a second time, this time to the much further away St. Helena, not as a ruler with money and privilege, but as a retired general with half his pay. St. Helena is only 28 square miles and a home base for the East India Trading Company, meaning their bosses had already taken most of the nice houses. Napoleon at one point said he would have been better off if he had stayed in Egypt in 1799. Water came from a well that was 3 miles away. He was never allowed to leave at night, and sentries were posted outside of his house as guards, and the rats on the island were so bold that they would run between diners' legs as they sat for meals. The English had a full squadron there just to watch Napoleon and to prevent him leaving as he did in Elba. His chief guard hated him and refused to refer to him as anything but General Napoleon, something that angered the former emperor to no bounds. It cost England £400,000 per year to station Napoleon's guards on the island. He lived for 4 years and picked up gardening as a hobby, but for 4 of the 5 years he was extremely sick. The official cause of the death of Napoleon is listed as cancer, but it's much more likely that he was slowly poisoned with arsenic by the French Bourbon King Louis, who had replaced him as ruler for a second time. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, who had conquered all of continental Europe and had to be exiled twice because of his power, his last words were, France, army, Tete d'Armée, and Josephine.